there is a misconception that abounds online. Many people would have us believe that science and religion are in conflict, and that only one can prevail. We see this, for example, by atheists, who sometimes try to categorize the world into categories such as the rational and the religious. We see this with, for example, Kent Hovind and creationists, who try and categorize the world into the religious and the humanists. These dichotomies are not atypical in a general sense. Humans quite often try to reduce dynamic and multidimensional concepts into binary stereotypes. Take, for example, this limited and partial list of political issues. Anyone could have a range of views that could fall on either side of this list. And even this list involves a pretty large degree of dichotomization. And yet, the way that the media portrays it, we would believe that there are two camps. There's the right, and then there's the left. Dichotomies, I think, are popular because they fit into the us versus them narrative, one of the most popular narratives in the history of the world. It makes people feel good to feel like they're waging war against them. They're fighting the good fight, whoever the them may be. But of course there are no thems in humanity. There's only us. Thems are figments of our imagination. Science cannot comment on the existence or the non-existence of God. That is, the question of God's existence is not a scientific question. Thus, evolution, a scientific theory, is not a threat to the existence of God. And any scientist who would have you believe that evolution disproves God is not making a scientific claim. They're making an ideological one. I've asked some of my friends and acquaintances to assist me in explaining why this dichotomization between evolution and God is wrong. I hold these people in great respect, and I hope that they can speak to any concerns or questions you might have about the relationship between science and God. So until next time, take care. Peace.
Hey guys, Lapguy speaking. So I will be replying to this point in this second part. So, I am to show how young Earth creationism or intelligent design is wrong. Well, they're the same, right? As it was established by American case laws, most specifically in 2005, the Kitzmiller et al. Versus the Dover Board of Education. But I digress. I urge you to check the sites for Scientific American, Nature, links in the description or in annotations. I don't know. I won't be doing the editing for once. And I also urge you to check the video answering the 15 questions pamphlet because it replies to many frequently asked questions by creationists. To really understand why young Earth creationists and intelligent design proponents are wrong, we have to see this scientifically. So let us look at the very base of any scientific discovery, the scientific method. How does it work? First of all, you ought to problematize something. Ask a question. Then you ought to do some background research, either through observations or just, reviewing the already scientific literature. Then, form a hypothesis. Then do an experiment trying to test your hypothesis. Finally, gather data and notes of everything that might happen in your experiment that might be extremely relevant. From that, you draw your conclusion and then compare that to your initial hypothesis. Two things might happen. If your hypothesis is false, you might go back to making another hypothesis. But if your hypothesis is actually confirmed, you ought to publish your results and submit it to your peers so they can evaluate your work. Because science is a social collaboration. Now, peer reviewing is a very long and difficult process. The slightest mistake can cost you dearly. And even if your paper is very good, still might be a chance that, yeah, it's good, but they won't publish your paper in that specific journal. But if your paper actually gets to be published in great scientific journals, there is a great dose of happy. So has evolution produced any peer-reviewed evidence? Well, actually yes. Some examples include fast-paced evolution and speciation amongst many others. And there's many more. A simple search for evolution in PubMed, which is a database for scientific papers, American specifically, you'll find evidences in the thousands. So, what is the peer-reviewed evidence for young Earth creationism? 0. What is the peer-reviewed evidence for intelligent design? 0, despite the fact that intelligent design proponents, well, some anyways, have published peer-reviewed papers but not supporting intelligent design. Now, if you look at the criteria for publication in great scientific journals, you actually see that they are quite open. For instance, in the journal Nature, you see that there are 4 main criteria for publication. Just as long as strong evidence is provided for the conclusion, just as long as the discovery is entirely new, and just as long as your discovery is actually relevant in its main field of study or other fields, then your discovery will be published. Probably because Nature gets many more papers that it can publish. So it rejects something in the lines of 90% of papers, and it basically publishes only the best and most spectacular breakthroughs in science. That would actually include evidence for young Earth creationism and intelligent design. Yeah, because it would revolutionize everything we know about science. I've said that, but I said this before, and I'm saying this again. Now, as another point, I want you to take a look at the criteria for publication from creation research journals and who claim to be peer-reviewed. So let's take a look at the Answers Research Journal and their 6 criteria for publication. If you wish to publish a paper in the Answers Research Journal, 6 criteria will be taken into account. Is the paper's topic relevant to the making of a creation and flood model? Does the paper provide an interesting contribution to the creation and flood model? Is the paper formulated within a young Earth, young universe framework? If the paper is polemical in nature, does it discuss a point that is left out in the origins debate? And, most important points, if the paper gives evidence of an old Earth, old universe, does this paper criticize this evidence and give a young Earth creationist alternative? And finally, does this paper provide faithfulness to the grammatical, historical, normative, and literal interpretation of Scripture? As you can see, this specific peer-reviewed creationist system is actually pretty close-minded, because it doesn't allow any evidence that counters young Earth creationism. Actually, the criteria for publication are in line with the Answers in Genesis, in this case, statement of faith. And the last criteria is the main reason why the Answers Research Journal is considered a theological journal rather than a scientific one. And you know, for people like this to be Christians just like us, you know, who hold to the fact that nature gives insights into the processes of divine creation, well, God reveals so far anyways, they themselves deny to see what nature reveals of how God made us and all life on earth over an interpretation of Scripture, as if truth could be somehow challenged by reality. They don't seem to have enough, you know, faith in God that clearly says that nature reveals the beauty of creation. And that's exactly my point. Major young Earth creationists and intelligent design proponents do not have faith. Instead, they have a religious ideology. A religious ideology that permits no acceptance of established scientific facts over a medieval model of reality. And they're defending it to the teeth. And, that's a wrap. Haha.
We learn in Genesis that God created us with intent and purpose. We know we have value in the eyes of God, else why would He will us to be? The creation is fundamentally good. Our dignity and value thus comes from this basic understanding. Contrast this with the notion that we are not the children of Eden, but the children of random mutations in a pitiless universe. Evolution challenges our most basic assumptions about our origins. Evolution challenges us about who we are. I will not presume myself capable of addressing, let alone understanding, your innermost concerns. However, if it helps, I do wish to share with you these 3 things. The first is that God so loved creating that he imbued this magnificent power within the very fabric of the creation itself. God gave the universe laws, and through nature's obedience everything from the first stars to you and I were born. Thus, while the mechanism is different, we are still the children of Eden. The second is that your evolutionary heritage cannot take away your worth as a human being. If your origins determined your worth, God would not have had the King of Kings born in a feed's trough in the boonies of the Roman Empire. The third is that since God created not just us, but all of nature, with the same love and will, nature too is valued in the eyes of God. Some Christians attempt to preserve their worth by devaluing everything else. We are valuable because everything else is not. Hence, to give humans an evolutionary link with nature is to remove this divide and place us on a similar level. To this I say God has already given you infinite worth. Return what prestige you have taken from nature and give it the respect it deserves. Finally, while you do not have to accept what I say, neither do you have to ascribe to the other philosophies associated with evolution. Evolution is the change in allele frequency within a population of organisms over time. The rest is details. Beyond the science, evolution only becomes what we teach others to believe. If you think teaching evolution will lead to social Darwinism or a fundamental devaluing of humanity, it is not because of the theory itself, but because of how the people misuse it to achieve their own ends. Likewise, Christianity has been misused to inflict all sorts of misery, yet we do not blame Christianity itself for this. Therefore, instead of discarding evolution, discard those ideas which have been artificially attached to evolution. Talk to Christians who do not find evolution so repulsive, or read books on the subject of theistic evolution. You just might gain from the perspectives they hold. Have a good one.
When we think of science, the relationship between science and religion, people, not just atheists, but Christians, many Christians, put a dichotomy between science and religion when they shouldn't be, when there is no conflict between the two. They are 2 completely different things that serve their purpose. Science is a tool to understanding God, plain and simple. But it's not a tool that can fully understand God himself, since science can only deal with the natural. Psalm 19 says this: "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth. Their words to the ends of the world. In the heavens God has pitched a tent for the sun. It is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, like a champion rejoicing to run his course. It rises at one end of the heavens and makes its circuit to the other. Nothing is to derive of his warmth." Now notice that. That's a poetic psalm describing how God creates, and how we can understand God's creation. That in of itself is not science per se, but it's a way of understanding God and creation. Science is just another way of explaining God's creation. When we think of religion, when we think of the Psalms, poetry, literature, that is one way of trying to understand God's creation. Science is another way of understanding God's creation. That is the way science should be. When we try to take science and use it on a being that is God, to try and understand using naturalistic means a being that is not natural, you are technically insulting God himself. Because, remember, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. If science can only deal with the natural, then why do we need science to explain God himself? When science goes into how God created, plain and simple. And that's the mechanism that science should be. And they should never, conflict with one another. Science is a tool, nothing else, that goes to try and understand God's creation. And when we try to mix science as a tool with the supernatural, we end up insulting God more than anything else. Because remember, if we're using science to understand his handiwork, why would we need to put God in the equation of every single little thing when science itself already is just explaining how God did it? It's already assumed that God created. And again, I repeat this. Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Remember that psalm, because that's important. Because that tells us that science does not need to conflict with religion at all.
Hi, my name is Michael J. Crawford, and I host the YouTube channel Rational Roundtable. I've been asked to address young Earth creationists and the fact that many of them feel that evolutionary theory is a threat to the very foundation of their faith. To you, I would say it's not a threat. After all, your faith is just that, your faith. Whether or not evolutionary theory says that the Earth is millions of years old, billions of years old, or a few thousand years old, should make no difference to your faith, to your belief that God is real, that Christ is real. But before you go attacking evolution, let me caution you about a couple of things. I know that many times you hear people say you just don't understand the theory, or you're ignorant of science, or whatever, and I'm not going to try and throw those types of terms around at you. I'm simply going to challenge you to understand that science is not a static ideological system. It's a dynamic, evolving system that is designed solely to learn, ultimately, how the universe works, including life itself. Now, currently, the best explanation that scientists have come up with for the diversification of life on this planet and the obvious changes that have taken place on this planet is what we call evolution. Does that mean that evolution is the final answer as to what it's all about? The answer is no. Science has no final answer, because science is constantly seeking out more information, trying to either disprove or strengthen their theories and attempt to get a better picture at what ultimately is the history of planet Earth and the universe that we're in. If, in fact, young Earth creationists are correct, if the Earth is somewhere around 6,000 years old, and the life that exists today has existed for all time or in some similar form, and started in a fully formed, evolved, if you will, system, then eventually the scientific data will confirm this. Because as science goes on, it gets, its system is designed to eliminate those things that are disproven and adapt new theories to explain the facts as we see them. Currently, evolution is the best system they've got to explain what we can see. Eventually, who knows? It could be some kind of evolution that we don't imagine now, that isn't driven by mutation and natural selection. Or it could be creationism. Or it could be something totally different that we haven't even considered.